You think you know this sandwich. 2 slices of bread, nothing controversial about it. It's the food we give to children because it's supposedly the safest, simplest, most American thing we own. Today I bring for you the history of peanut butter sandwich, people who started to prepare first time, and with how it takes modern shape. You will know everything, so stay with me. Here's the problem. Almost nothing about that sentence is true. The peanut in your sandwich made a round trip halfway across the planet before it ever touched bread. The people who first turned it into a paste weren't rewarded for it, they were enslaved for it. And the original 1901 recipe that gets credited as the birth of the PB&J wasn't cooked in a kitchen at all. It was served in a tea room to people who could afford to call peanuts a delicacy. By the end of this video, you'll know why the most wholesome sandwich in America is actually one of its most quietly dishonest. Start with the easy one. George Washington Carver did not invent peanut butter. Fewer know how far off the credit actually is. Carver's peanut research didn't even begin until the 1900s. Peanut paste was already being patented and sold before he published a single paper on the plant. So if Carver didn't invent it, who did? Here's where it gets messy. There isn't one answer. There are at least 4 men, all claiming the same invention, all within about 40 years of each other. That's not a footnote. That's a fight over ownership of something that, as we're about to find out, none of them actually originated. 1884, a Canadian named Marcellus Gilmore Edson patents something he calls peanut paste, milled between 2 heated rollers. 11 years later, Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, yes, that Kellogg, patents his own version, marketed to patients at his sanitarium who couldn't chew solid meat. Then a Missouri doctor named Ambrose Straub patents a machine to make it. Then in 1922, a chemist named Joseph Roosevelt finally solves the problem of peanut oil separating and calls his smooth, shelf-stable version Skippy. 4 men, 4 patents, 4 claims to invention. Notice what's missing from that list. Not one of them discovered peanuts. Not one of them discovered that peanuts could be ground into a paste. They discovered how to patent a process that already existed in the Americas and in West Africa for centuries before any of them were born. So if the paste already existed, who was making it? The peanut is native to South America, the region around modern Bolivia and Argentina. Spanish and Portuguese traders carried it across the Atlantic to West Africa in the 1500s, where it took root in local farming and cooking almost immediately. Then it made a second crossing, a darker one. Enslaved West Africans were forced onto slave ships bound for the Americas, and peanuts, cheap, calorie-dense, easy to store, were sometimes the only food rationed to them during the Middle Passage. When those same people were enslaved on plantations in the Middle South, they carried the knowledge of the crop with them. Some accounts describe enslaved people smuggling peanut seeds in secret, growing them in small garden plots the planters didn't control. There's a word for peanut that survives from that crossing. In Kikondo, spoken in what's now Congo and Angola, the word is nguba. Historians believe that word traveled with the people who carried it and became the Southern American slang you've probably said 100 times without knowing where it came from. Goober. A word most Americans use casually came from an act of cultural survival under slavery. Sit with that for a second. We're not done. Here's where the story stops being about etymology and starts being about theft. In the American South, enslaved cooks weren't just growing peanuts for survival, they were transforming them. Roasting them, boiling them, grinding them into pastes, and folding them into cakes with molasses. In Charleston, free and enslaved black women, called Maumas, sold peanut and molasses groundnut cakes on the street, working from 3-legged stools near the wharves, decades before Julia Davis Chandler ever wrote down a peanut paste recipe for a magazine of well-off home cooks. We don't know most of their names. That's not a research gap we can shrug off. That's the injustice itself. White planters at the time dismissed the peanut as slave food, suitable only for the enslaved and for hogs. The same crop, prepared by the same hands, using techniques those hands had preserved across an ocean and a genocide of displacement, and it was considered beneath notice. Then, decades later, when peanut paste got patented by white doctors and chemists, it stopped being beneath notice. It became an invention. Ask yourself, how does the same food go from slave food to patentable delicacy in one generation without the people who perfected it ever being named? It gets worse. The specific peanut those women were using, a variety historians call the Carolina African runner, nearly went extinct. It was the peanut of the antebellum South, used in fritters, soups, and Charleston's signature groundnut cakes. But by the 1930s, industrial agriculture had moved on to higher yield varieties. The Carolina African runner all but vanished. In recent years, researchers have worked to revive it from a tiny handful of surviving seeds. Think about what that means. The plant that built an entire Southern food tradition, a tradition kept alive by enslaved and formerly enslaved black cooks, nearly disappeared from the earth before we even had names to attach to the people who grew it. Meanwhile, the sandwich itself kept climbing the social ladder without them. Julia Davis Chandler's 1901 recipe was a tea room finger sandwich, currant jelly, thin bread, aimed at people who could afford peanut paste as a novelty. It took the Great Depression and then World War II ration kits to turn PB&J into a cheap, mass, working-class food we think of it as today. So the sandwich's journey from elite curiosity to everyday staple is well documented. The sandwich's ingredients journey from West African foodways through slavery into an anonymous Southern street trade and finally into a white author's magazine byline is the part nobody puts on the label. So no, this isn't the simple, all-American sandwich you grew up with. It's a food built on a peanut that crossed the Atlantic twice, once as a trade good, once as slave ship rations. It's a paste perfected by enslaved cooks and sold nameless by free black women on Charleston's docks, decades before a white home economist got her name in a magazine for writing it down. Carver didn't invent it. Chandler didn't invent it. 4 competing patent holders didn't invent it either. The people who actually did are the ones history never bothered to name. The next time someone hands you a PB&J and calls it the simplest thing in the world, remember, simple is just the story that gets told when nobody's asking who really made it. See you next time. Bye.